When I first saw the cabin, I thought it was perfect. A small wooden place tucked between pines, overlooking a quiet lake that caught the sunlight just right in the evenings. The kind of place where time slows down, where a man can finally breathe after years of deadlines, traffic, and concrete. I wasn't buying a property, I was buying peace, or at least that's what I thought. It took 2 months of paperwork and back and forth with the seller, but when I finally got the keys, I drove up that dirt road with a smile that wouldn't quit. The air smelled like pine and rain. The lake shimmered like it was welcoming me home. I parked, stepped out, and just stood there for a while listening. No cars, no voices, no noise, just the sound of water and the wind moving through the trees. It felt like freedom. I should known freedom like that never comes cheap. The first sign of trouble showed up before I even finished unloading the truck. A white SUV rolled up, spotless, shiny, with a logo on the door that read Lakeshore Property Association. The driver's window slid down and a woman leaned out with a smile so tight it looked painful. "Hi there," she said, tilting her head like a school teacher about to give a lecture. "I'm Karen, president of the HOA." Her tone made president sound like dictator. I told her I didn't know the area had an HOA. She laughed, not the friendly kind, more like she was humoring a child. "Oh, everyone around the lake is under HOA management," she said. "We keep things orderly around here." I nodded slowly, trying to be polite. "That's great, I like things orderly too, but this property isn't part of the HOA. The listing and deed were pretty clear on that." Her smile flickered. "Oh, that's what everyone says at first, but we'll see once we review your file." My file, that word stuck with me. She hadn't even introduced herself properly, but she already had a file on me. Before I could respond, she pointed toward my cabin. "Are you planning to move in today?" "Yeah," I said, "figured I'd get settled." She gave a tight little laugh. "That's not how this works. You need prior move-in approval, otherwise you'll be in violation of community standards." That was the moment I realized what kind of person I was dealing with. Not the neighborly kind, the clipboard kind, the kind who treats every patch of grass like classified territory. I kept my tone calm. "Well, ma'am, this isn't community property, it's my land, I can move in whenever I like." For a second I thought she might argue, but instead she just smiled that same polished smile and said, "We'll be in touch," before driving off down the hill. I tried to brush it off. There was furniture to unload, tools to organize, and a lake view that made every heavy lift feel worth it. But I couldn't shake the image of her SUV creeping down the road, slow, deliberate, like she was memorizing everything. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, I caught sight of her again. Same SUV. She drove by twice, then stopped for a few seconds across the street. I could see her silhouette through the windshield, holding something up, probably a camera phone. That's when I started to feel it, the unease, the kind you get when you realize you're being watched. The next morning, there was a knock at my door. Not a gentle one, 3 sharp raps, like someone announcing authority. I opened it, half expecting Karen again, and sure enough, there she was, holding a clipboard this time. She didn't even say hello. "You haven't submitted your landscape plan," she said flatly, "and the truck you parked by your cabin doesn't meet community vehicle standards." I stared at her for a moment. "My truck." "Yes," she said, nodding, "it's loud." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It's a 2004 F-150, not a drag racer. Karen didn't laugh. She just wrote something on her clipboard and said, "You'll receive a notice." She turned and walked away before I could reply. That's when I decided to look her up. I spent that evening searching the HOA website, and sure enough, there she was, Karen, HOA president, serving since 2014. Under her name was a motto that made my jaw clench: maintaining perfection, one property at a time. By the next morning, there was a bright orange envelope taped to my door. Violation Notice 1, unauthorized vehicle, fine $250. I took the paper, read it twice, and laughed out loud. She actually did it. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't just playing HOA, she was about to turn my peaceful cabin move-in into a full-blown war. And I wasn't planning to lose. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of gravel crunching outside. My first thought was maybe a delivery truck or a neighbor coming to say hello. But when I stepped onto the porch, there was nothing except a neat white envelope taped right to my doorframe. Violation Notice 2, it read in bold black letters. Underneath in all caps, failure to maintain property appearance, warning level. I stood there half asleep, reading it twice just to make sure it wasn't a prank. Failure to maintain property appearance. I hadn't even moved in yet. Then I noticed the small line at the bottom, photo documentation on file. I looked toward the road. Sure enough, there was a faint set of tire tracks in the dirt, fresh ones. She'd been here again, probably at dawn. I walked down to the mailbox to cool off. The lake was calm, the fog low, and for a second I almost forgot about her. But as soon as I turned the corner, I spotted that white SUV parked just a few houses away. Karen sat inside, pretending to look at her phone but angled toward my property like a security camera with lipstick. I raised a hand in a half wave, trying to play it friendly. She didn't wave back. Instead, she lifted her phone just slightly, probably snapping another photo. I muttered under my breath, unbelievables. That afternoon, I called the county office again. I wanted to be absolutely sure about the property lines. The woman on the phone was polite but tired, the kind of tired that comes from hearing the same HOA disputes over and over. She pulled up the records and confirmed it. You're outside their jurisdiction by about 60 feet. That cabin was built before the HOA existed. They can't fine you for anything. I thanked her and hung up, feeling better for about 5 minutes. Then came the next email. It was from Karen herself. Subject line: urgent, immediate compliance required. Her message was long, written like a legal memo. She listed a dozen violations, each more ridiculous than the last. My trash bin was visible from the road, my driveway wasn't edged properly, my truck exceeded community noise standards. She even claimed my porch light was non-conforming. At the bottom, she signed it with "Regards, President." I typed a reply, kept it short. Karen, this property is outside HOA jurisdiction. Please stop sending notices. I thought that would end it, but 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Her response was instant. We have reason to believe your property should be annexed under HOA protection due to adjacency. We will be reviewing your case. Annexed? She made it sound like I was being invaded. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, trying to laugh it off. But as the sun set, a pair of headlights came creeping up the road again. The same SUV. She slowed down, rolled down her window, and said, "Just checking your lot lines for community safety." I leaned on the porch rail. You sure you're not checking for new things to fine? She smiled like she hadn't heard me. You'll receive updates in writing, she said, then drove off again, tires crunching like punctuation marks. By the end of the week, I'd received 3 more notices. Violation 3, unauthorized equipment visible. Violation 4, failure to submit landscaping proposal. Violation 5, potential noncompliance with noise regulation. Every one of them had the same stamped signature at the bottom, Karen. It was almost impressive how fast she worked. My buddy Mike came by that weekend to help me finish setting up the generator. I showed him the stack of letters. He read the top one, laughed so hard he nearly dropped his wrench, and said, "Man, she's got too much time and not enough hobbies." Yeah, I said, I think I'm her new hobby. We joked about printing her face on a scarecrow and setting it by the driveway. But the truth was, it wasn't funny anymore. She wasn't just annoying, she was starting to act like she owned the place. On Sunday morning, I caught her standing near my fence line with 2 other HOA members. They had clipboards too. She was pointing toward my roof, gesturing, talking in that stiff, managerial way people use when they think they're important. I walked down the hill to meet them. You folks need something. Karen didn't even look embarrassed. We're verifying property maintenance compliance, she said. This isn't your property, I told her, and you're trespassing. Her expression didn't change. The board reserves the right to conduct inspections when property conditions affect community aesthetics. Yeah, well, I said, this property doesn't affect your community because it's not part of it. One of the men behind her shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should go, Karen. But she wasn't done. She pointed at my cabin and said, you'll regret ignoring HOA guidance. Everyone who does eventually does. And with that, she turned and walked back to her SUV. I stood there for a long time after they left, just listening to the wind in the trees, the sound of my dog barking in the distance. The lake was calm, but something in me was. Karen had crossed a line, and if she kept pushing, I wasn't just going to stand there and take it. Because one thing I've learned over the years, you can't reason with people who believe power makes them right. Sometimes you have to remind them that the world doesn't revolve around their rules. And soon she was about to learn that lesson the hard way. By the following Monday, I stopped opening the envelopes. They all said the same thing: violations, warnings, threats of further action. I stacked them on the kitchen counter like unwanted mail from another universe. I wasn't part of their community, but somehow the HOA had declared war on me. The quiet mornings I loved were gone. Every time I looked out the window, I'd see someone from the HOA walking slowly past the edge of my property, pretending to check drainage or inspect foliage. They carry clipboards, wear those little HOA lanyards, and act like they were surveying enemy land. I kept track. In 1 week they'd been there 6 times. 6. The 6th time was when I decided to confront them. I was on the porch repairing a step when Karen appeared again. She had 2 other people with her this time, both dressed like they were going to a board meeting, not walking through mud. One man was carrying a small tripod with a measuring device, and the other had a tablet. Karen smiled that same plastic smile. "Good morning, we're conducting a boundary assessment." "Eh, what?" I asked, standing up. She gestured toward the tree line. "We believe the HOA's jurisdiction might extend beyond the current boundary map. We're confirming whether your parcel technically falls under HOA governance." I laughed. "You're joking. You can't just decide my land belongs to you." She tilted her head. "It's a gray area. Our council believes the association's right-of-way includes part of your driveway." There it was, the real motive. They wanted control of the only private road leading to my cabin. If they could claim that, they could legally enforce their rules on me. The man with the tripod avoided my eyes. The other one typed something on the tablet. I could see his hand shaking a little. "You're trespassing," I said calmly, "and unless you want me to call the county, I suggest you move along." Karen smiled wider. "We're well within our rights, and if you call the county, you'll only make this worse for yourself." She said it like a warning, but her tone was pure satisfaction. That was the first time I felt it, the slow burn of anger rising up my chest. I'd dealt with people like her before, the kind who confuse intimidation with leadership, but she wasn't just flexing authority, she was obsessed with it. I stepped closer until we were eye to eye. "This property isn't yours to manage. You take one more step past that line and you'll be the one breaking the law." She didn't move, just smiled again and said, "We'll see what the county says." Then she turned on her heel, her little entourage following behind like soldiers marching away from a skirmish they thought they'd won. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop. I looked up every HOA law, every property statute, every map I could find. The county assessor's office had digital boundaries available online. I downloaded the PDF, printed it, and traced the lines myself. There was no gray area. My property was outside the HOA's control by 63 feet exactly. I scanned the document, highlighted the border, and printed 3 copies, one for myself, one for the sheriff's office, and one just in case I needed it later. But by morning, it was already too late. At 8 a.m., I heard voices outside. When I stepped onto the porch, there were orange cones lined up across my driveway and a big wooden sign that said HOA access restricted, authorized personnel only. Karen stood beside it, clipboard in hand, talking to a man I'd never seen before. When she noticed me, she smiled like she'd just won the lottery. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," she called out. "We're implementing a temporary traffic restriction until we determine boundary status." "You're blocking my driveway," I said. "Technically," she said, "this area might fall under HOA right-of-way." I looked at the man beside her. "Who's he?" "Private contractor," she replied. "We're installing a surveillance camera for community safety." That was it. I walked right up to the sign, grabbed the nearest cone, and tossed it off the road. "Karen, move your circus somewhere else," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Touch another one and we'll have you cited for destruction of HOA property." I stared at her, quiet for a few seconds. "You really think you can scare me with your paperwork?" "Not paperwork," she said softly, "policy." Then she turned to the man beside her and said, "Call it in." That phrase hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Call what in?" I asked. She didn't answer, just turned, got in her SUV, and drove off, leaving her contractor behind to pick up the mess. That night, an official-looking letter arrived. The HOA was filing for jurisdictional review with the county. It was written like a legal motion, full of fancy language about community oversight, boundary discrepancies, and resident noncompliance. It would take the county at least 2 weeks to review it, and in those 2 weeks, she could keep harassing me without consequence. I stood there reading that letter in the glow of my porch light, feeling the wind from the lake start to pick up. Somewhere out there, an owl hooted. I folded the letter, slid it into the growing pile of violations, and smiled to myself. She wanted a war of paperwork. She had no idea who she was dealing with. The morning of the move-in started calm, too calm. The fog was rolling low over the lake, sunlight slicing through the trees in silver beams. My friend Mark had just pulled up in his old pickup loaded with boxes and tools. We'd planned to finish moving the last of my cabin furniture that day, seal the deck, and finally be done with this circus. I remember saying, half jokingly, if Karen doesn't show up today, I might actually start believing in miracles. Mark laughed. She'll show up, they always do, power-hungry people can't stand silence. He was right. By mid-morning, we were hauling boxes through the doorway when a black SUV appeared at the edge of the road, the same one Karen always drove. It stopped just past the tree line, engine idling. Through the windshield, I saw her face, cold, focused. She didn't step out, she just sat there, phone in hand, watching. Mark squinted. She's filming, isn't she? Probably, I said, documenting my crimes against the HOA. We kept working, but 10 minutes later I heard the first siren. It started faint, a single wail cutting through the mountain air, then another joined it, and another. Within minutes, there were flashing lights winding up the narrow dirt road that led to my property. Mark dropped his box. You've got to be kidding me. I stepped outside just as the first patrol car pulled in, then a second, then a third, all lights on, tires crunching over gravel. The lead officer stepped out tall, broad-shouldered, wearing mirrored aviators. He scanned the property, then looked at me. You Mr. Wilson. I nodded slowly. Yeah, what's going on? He glanced over his shoulder toward Karen, who was now standing beside her SUV, arms crossed, face full of triumph. We got a call, he said. Possible illegal construction and trespassing on HOA-managed property. I almost laughed. Illegal construction, this is my house, my land. Karen called out from behind the officers, loud enough for everyone to hear. He's refusing to comply with HOA code and blocking emergency access. I told you, officer, this area falls under community authority. The officer turned to her. Ma'am, we'll handle it. But she kept talking, fast, desperate, pointing at my porch, my truck, even the deck tools. He's been ignoring citations for weeks. You need to stop him before. Ma'am, the officer said again, this time with an edge. Step back, please. She blinked, caught off guard by the tones. He turned back to me. Do you have proof of ownership? I reached into my jacket and handed him the folder I'd prepared, title deed, property survey, printed county boundary map. He flipped through it slowly. The deputies behind him leaned in, murmuring. Karen was packing now, agitated. He forged those. The HOA has jurisdiction. But the officer raised a hand to silence her. Karen, right? She hesitated. Yes, I'm the HOA president. He studied her for a moment, then looked back at my documents. According to the county line, this cabin sits outside the HOA boundary by 63 feet. I could see the color drain from her face. That can't be right, she said quickly. Our records. Ma'am, the officer interrupted. County records override HOA paperwork. You've got no jurisdiction here. For a second, everything went still. No birds, no wind, just the faint hum of the police cruisers. Then the officer turned to me and something unexpected happened. He smiled. Sir, I believe we've met before. I frowned. We have. He nodded. Afghanistan, 2012. You were part of the engineering unit at Forward Operating Base Vega, weren't you? It hit me like a flash. I remembered the face under the helmet, the same calm voice giving orders during a blackout repair. Sergeant Miller. I let out a stunned laugh. Miller, you're kidding me. Karen looked between us, confused. Wait, you know him. Miller grinned. Knew him, served with him, one of the best logistics officers we had. And then in front of Karen, her clipboard, and half the county police department, Miller raised his hand in a crisp, formal salute. Good to see you again, sir. Karen's jaw dropped. Her clipboard slipped from her hand and hit the gravel. Mark couldn't hold his laughter anymore. Guess your HOA patrol just got outranked, ma'am. For the first time, Karen didn't have a comeback. She just stood there frozen, her carefully built authority crumbling right in front of her. Miller turned to his deputies. This property's off limits for HOA interference. If they come back without a warrant or county order, they'll be trespassing. Then looking back at me, he added with a smile, "Glad you're still building things instead of blowing them up." I chuckled, "Glad you're still cleaning up chaos instead of causing it." As the patrol cars rolled away, Karen stayed there, silent, gripping her clipboard with trembling fingers. I watched her get into her SUV and drive off without a word. But I knew that look. That wasn't retreat, it was recalculation. And something told me this war was far from over. For 3 whole days after the police incident, I didn't see Karen anywhere near my hill. The air actually felt lighter. Mark and I joked that she was probably updating her community violation spreadsheet or drafting a new HOA law just for me. But deep down, I knew she wasn't done. People like Karen don't back off, they regroup. On the 4th morning, I found out just how right I was. I woke to the sound of my generator sputtering out. When I went outside to check, there was a thick orange sticker slapped across the side of it, County Energy Division Equipment Shutdown Order. I frowned, that made no sense. The county doesn't regulate portable generators. Then I spotted a second notice taped to my fence, pending inspection, potential environmental violation. I actually laughed, environmental violation, what for breathing mountain air? Mark showed up an hour later with coffee and one look at my fence made him whistle. Man, she's creative, you gotta give her that. Creative isn't the word I'd use, I said, she's poking the wrong bear. I called the county number listed on the notice. A woman answered and said, "Sir, we've received several citizen complaints about unauthorized construction and chemical disposal near the lake." I blinked, chemical disposal, ma'am, the only chemical I've got is bug spray. The woman hesitated, "We're required to investigate, it's multiple reports, anonymous." Anonymous, yeah sure, I could practically hear Karen's smug smile through the phone. "All right," I said calmly, "you're welcome to inspect, just let me know when you're coming, I'll have my paperwork ready." When I hung up, Mark chuckled, "You sound way too calm." "Oh, I'm calm," I said, "because she just made her biggest mistake yet." He raised an eyebrow, which is. She dragged the county into this and forgot who built half their inspection stations. That afternoon, a white county truck pulled up the road. 2 inspectors stepped out, clipboards in hand, looking cautious. I met them halfway down the path. One of them looked up, "Mr. Wilson." "That's me, you here for the environmental apocalypse I'm supposedly causing." They both cracked reluctant smiles. I could tell they were just doing their jobs. "We just need to verify there's no fuel leakage or restricted materials being stored here." "Go ahead," I said, gesturing toward the cabin. "You'll find more coffee than chemicals." They checked everything, the generator, the shed, the deck materials. It took maybe 15 minutes. Then one of them said quietly, "Off the record, sir, this complaint doesn't hold water, literally." I smiled, figured as much. But before they left, one inspector asked, "If I may, do you have any enemies in the HOA?" I grinned, "Just one, but she's enough to fill a courtroom." They laughed, shook my hand, and promised to file a clean report. That evening, I saw Karen standing by her mailbox at the bottom of the hill, pretending to check letters that weren't there. She looked up at me once, trying to read my expression. I just raised my coffee mug and waved. Her face twitched, then she slammed the mailbox shut and stormed back inside. By the next morning, she'd changed tactics again. I woke to find a half-dozen HOA members walking the property line with cameras. Every few minutes, one would shout something like, "We're documenting evidence." I just stood on my porch and said, "Make sure to get my good side." They didn't laugh, but Mark did. He was filming from his truck the whole time. Later that day, I decided enough was enough. I called up my old contact at the county records office, an old friend named Carol. We worked together years ago on disaster logistics. She picked up right away. "Wilson, haven't heard from you since the flood drills. What's going on?" "Oh, just a little HOA drama. Someone's filing fake complaints under your department's name." There was a pause, then her tone shifted. "Fake county notices, that's a felony." "Yeah," I said, "and I've got them pinned to my fence." She exhaled sharply. "Send me photos, I'll run the signatures." By sunset, she called back, furious. "Those aren't ours. Someone forged the stickers using last year's format, I'll handle it." The next day, Karen got a very different visit, this time from an actual county investigator. Mark and I watched from the hill as a white SUV pulled up to her driveway. The investigator stepped out, holding a file folder, and walked straight to her door. Karen tried her usual charm routine, but it didn't work. I saw her face go pale as he showed her the fake notices. They talked for nearly 20 minutes. Then the investigator left and Karen didn't come out again for the rest of the day. That night I sat on the porch with Mark. The lake reflected the moon like glass. "Think she's done?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. No, Karen's the type who will set herself on fire if it means getting to hold the match. He laughed. "So what's next?" I smiled. "Next we wait, because the deeper she digs, the more the truth's gonna bury her." The air was still, peaceful, almost deceptive. But I knew the silence before a storm always sounds sweetest. For a while, it felt like the storm had passed. Karen stopped appearing at the bottom of my hill. The HOA members who'd been filming me scattered like startled pigeons. Even the constant stream of fake citations in my mailbox dried up. Mark said maybe she'd finally realized she'd lost. But I knew better. Karen didn't lose quietly. She waited, she plotted. And she made her move 2 weeks later in front of the whole community. It started with an envelope, plain white, no return address, dropped at my gate. Inside was a letter printed on official-looking HOA letterhead. It read, "Notice of Emergency Community Meeting Agenda, Unauthorized Occupancy, Environmental Damage, and Enforcement Vote." At the bottom, Karen's name was signed in looping cursive, President, Lakeshore HOA. Mark groaned when I showed it to him. "She's really calling a town meeting to get you kicked out." "Let her," I said. "The more she talks, the more rope she gives herself." That Saturday, I drove down to the Lakeshore Clubhouse, a fancy glass and stone building by the marina. Every resident was there. You could feel the tension humming in the air. Karen stood at the front, dressed like she was hosting a courtroom drama, beige suit, pearl earrings, and that same self-righteous smile that could curdle milk. "Thank you everyone for attending this urgent meeting," she began, voice loud and polished. "As your HOA president, it's my duty to ensure our community remains safe, compliant, and..." "Boring," someone whispered from the back. Laughter rippled, but Karen ignored it. She motioned to a projector behind her. Photos of my cabin flashed, my generator, my truck, even my dog. "This individual," she said, "has continued to violate community code by occupying unapproved property within our zone." A few murmurs filled the room. People turned to look at me. I stayed calm, leaning against the back wall, arms crossed. Karen pressed on. "He has refused to pay maintenance dues, ignored safety standards, and, according to reports, endangered the lake ecosystem with chemical storage." That one made the room stir. "Chemical storage," a man said aloud. "You mean that little red gas can?" Karen hesitated, eyes flicking nervously across the crowd. "It's not about the size, it's about the principle." I stepped forward, my boots echoing on the clubhouse floor. "You're right about that, Karen. It's about principle, and yours seems to be bending like a wet branch." The crowd chuckled. Karen's smile twitched. "This is not a forum for personal attacks." "Funny," I said, pulling something from my jacket, "because I'd call forgery pretty personal." Gasps spread as I held up the 2 fake county stickers, the ones she'd plastered on my property. I walked toward the front table and set them down. "The county, these are forgeries. Someone used last year's format and signatures." Karen's voice cracked. "That doesn't prove anything." I grinned. "It proves enough, because the investigator who visited your house last week filed a report with your name on it." Her eyes widened, and for the first time her mask slipped. You can't prove I." Just then the doors at the back opened. Everyone turned. In walked Officer Miller in full uniform. Behind him were 2 deputies. The entire room went silent. Karen froze. Miller nodded to me, then looked at her. "Mrs., we have reason to believe you knowingly distributed counterfeit county documents to intimidate a private property owner. That's obstruction and forgery under state law." The color drained from her face. "Officer, this must be a misunderstanding. I was only trying to enforce." He cut her off. "You were trying to enforce your ego, and that's not a legal jurisdiction." Mark leaned over to me and whispered, "You couldn't have written this better if it were a movie." Karen's knees wobbled. "You can't arrest me in front of my community." Miller smirked. "Who said anything about arresting? We're here to issue a citation and a formal warning, but you'll need to appear in county court." He placed the papers on the table. The entire room was dead quiet. Then Miller turned to me. "Sir," he said, straightening up, "for what it's worth, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for your service and your patience." And right there, in front of every HOA member, he saluted me again. The crowd erupted, claps, cheers, a few laughs. Even the neighbors who'd once glared at me looked relieved. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for support, but no one stepped forward. Her allies looked away. When the noise died down, I looked her straight in the eye. "Karen," I said, calm and clear, "this was never about rules, it was about respect. Maybe next time try earning it instead of demanding it." She said nothing, just turned, picked up her purse, and stormed out past the officers, past her neighbors, out into the blinding afternoon light. Miller watched her go, then chuckled. "Guess the neighborhood's gonna be a lot quieter now." "Maybe," I said, smiling faintly, "but something tells me that woman's got one more trick up her sleeve." He grinned, "Then let's hope she plays it where the cameras are rolling." We shook hands, and as I stepped out into the sunlight, the lake shimmered like glass, calm for now. But I knew the final act wasn't over yet. Karen had lost the crowd, the county, and her pride, and people like her, they don't fade away. They explode. And when she did, I'd be ready. For a brief moment after that meeting, I actually believed the storm was over. The air around the lake felt lighter. Neighbors who had once watched me from behind blinds started waving when I drove by. Even the board members who'd stood behind Karen were suddenly out of office. But I knew better. When someone like Karen gets embarrassed publicly, they don't heal, they plot. And she was plotting, I could feel it. It started small, a rumor here, a whisper there. Someone at the local grocery store told me that Mr. Wilson was under federal investigation. Another neighbor mentioned they'd heard I built my cabin with stolen materials. I just smiled. Interesting, I built it myself with a hammer and bad knees. But the more ridiculous the stories got, the more I knew Karen was behind them. She wasn't trying to win anymore, she was trying to poison my name. Mark said she's trying to smoke you out, make you the villain in her own redemption arc. Let her try, I told him, she's about to step on her own. A week later, that went off. I was sitting on my porch when two SUVs pulled up my drive. One was the county inspector's vehicle, the other, a sleek black government SUV with tinted windows. Out stepped a man in a gray suit and sunglasses. He flashed a badge, Homeland Security. "Mr. Wilson," he asked. I blinked. "That's me, what's this about?" He handed me a file. "We received an anonymous report of illegal weapon storage and restricted equipment on this property." Mark, standing behind me, nearly spit out his coffee. "Weapons, the guy's biggest gun is a nail gun." The agent didn't laugh. "We have to follow protocols." I exhaled slowly. "Of course, you're welcome to look around." As they started inspecting the cabin, I saw a familiar SUV parked at the edge of the property. Karen's SUV. She wasn't even trying to hide, sitting there, phone up, recording the entire thing. Mark muttered, "She's this, isn't she?" "Oh, absolutely," I said, "and she's about to regret it." The agent came back after 20 minutes, face unreadable. "Mr. Wilson, your property is clear, no restricted materials, no violations, but I do have a question for you." "Shoot." "Where do you serve?" he asked suddenly. That caught me off guard. "Army Corps of Engineers, why?" He nodded slowly. "I thought your name sounded familiar. You worked under Colonel Reeves, didn't you?" I smiled. "That's right, you knew him." "I trained under him, small world." Then the agent turned toward Karen's SUV, where she was still filming. He signaled to one of the county inspectors. "You might want to let that woman know making false reports to federal departments is a serious offense." The inspector nodded and walked over. Karen rolled down her window, her face tight and pale. "I was only trying to protect the neighborhood," she said, voice trembling. "I had no idea." "Ma'am," the agent interrupted firmly, "you filed a report alleging federal crimes without evidence. That's not protection, that's obstruction." Karen stammered something about concerned citizens and community safety, but the agent wasn't listening. He handed her a document through the window, an official warning. Her face went white. "What does this mean?" "It means," he said, "next time you'll be talking to a judge instead of us." She froze, clutching the paper like it was a snake. Then, as if the universe wanted to rub salt in the wound, Officer Miller's patrol car appeared behind the SUVs. He stepped out, recognized the situation instantly, and smirked. "Afternoon, folks, everything under control." The Homeland agent nodded. "All good, just a case of mistaken enthusiasm." Miller shot me a look. "Karen agains." I nodded. "Karen agains." He sighed, then walked over to her window. Ma'am, if you keep calling in fake emergencies, we're going to have to classify it as harassment. You understand that? She didn't answer, just stared straight ahead, tears welling but never falling. The perfect storm of humiliation, fear, and denial. Mark whispered, "That's it, she's cooked." But I wasn't so sure. Karen started her car, backed out slowly, and drove away, not in anger this time, but in silence. That silence, that's what unsettled me most. Later that night, Mark came over with 2 beers and said, "You think she's finally learned her lesson?" I looked out at the lake, still, moonlight rippling across the surface. "No," I said softly, "she's not done. People like her never stop until someone stops them." He frowned. "You planning to do that?" I smiled faintly. "No, the truth will." Because what Karen didn't know was that her little report had triggered a full audit, not on me, but on her HOA. The county had to verify all the paperwork she'd submitted, including her own filings, her authority as president, and the association's tax records. And by morning, that audit would land right on her desk. Mark grinned when he realized, "So you didn't have to bury her, she dug the hole herself." "Exactly," I said, "I just handed her the shovel." The wind picked up, carrying the sound of frogs from the lake. Somewhere down the hill, Karen's porch light flickered on and off like a warning or maybe a surrender. Whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow would be the end of it. When the police saluted me that day, Karen's face froze like she'd just swallowed ice. The woman who had called 911 to stop me from moving into my own cabin suddenly looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. But it wasn't over, not yet. See, while everyone thought that salute was the end of the story, it was actually the beginning of the fallout. And trust me, karma had a strange sense of humor that week. After the officers left, Karen stormed toward me with her usual rage, but this time her voice was trembling. "This isn't over, mister, you're not above the law." I smiled and said, "You're right, that's why I followed it, you might want to try that sometime." Her jaw dropped. She spun around and yelled something to her board members, but they just stood there, silent, uncomfortable, and clearly realizing they backed the wrong person. By sunset, the whole neighborhood knew what had happened. Someone had filmed the entire incident, Karen screaming into her phone, the officers showing up and then saluting me. That clip spread faster than wildfire. By morning, everyone from the mailman to the mayor had seen HOA Karen versus the veteran. And that's when the real trouble started for her. Apparently, a few of her executive decisions hadn't exactly followed HOA bylaws. Turns out she'd been using HOA funds to beautify her property, landscaping, new paint, even an expensive backyard fountain, all billed as community upgrades. The moment people found out, the board called an emergency meeting. And since my cabin technically fell under the same association, I got the invitation too. Oh, I went, believe me, I went. That evening, the small clubhouse was packed. Karen sat at the front table, pretending to hold her composure. I could see her hands shaking behind the folder she was clutching. One of the board members, Bill, a retired accountant, stood up and said, "We've reviewed the HOA expenses from the last year. There are discrepancies, major ones." Karen snapped, "Bill, this is completely inappropriate." Bill ignored her. "The problem is these community expenses all trace back to your address. Care to explain?" The room went silent. You could hear the ceiling fan clicking. Karen looked at me as if somehow this was my fault. "He's behind this, he's trying to make me look bad." I raised my hands. "Karen, I didn't have to make you look bad, you did that all on your own." A few people chuckled. She didn't. After an hour of chaos, shouting, and finger-pointing, the board voted to remove her as president. Just like that, the self-appointed queen of the HOA was dethroned. But the part that still makes me laugh, she didn't go quietly. As she stormed out, she looked at me and hissed, "You think you've won?" I smiled and said, "No, Karen, the neighborhood won." She slammed the door so hard it rattled the windows. A week later, I was enjoying a quiet morning at the cabin when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. For a second, I thought, great, what now? But when the door opened, I froze. Out stepped the same police officer who had saluted me that day, Captain Briggs. He shook my hand. "Just wanted to thank you, sir. After that whole fiasco, a few of us looked into what you did before you retired. We didn't realize you were part of the flood response unit during the Big Bend disaster." I laughed softly. "That was a long time ago, Captain." He smiled. "Doesn't matter, you saved lives, people remember that." Before he left, he looked around my property and said, "Beautiful place, you earned it." And for the first time since I moved in, the lake felt peaceful again. That evening, I sat by the water sipping coffee, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The reflection shimmered off the water like gold, the same lake Karen once claimed was community property. Now it was quiet, serene mine again. Every now and then, I still see her car drive by on the main road, slower than usual, like she's checking to see if I'm still here. And every time she does, I just wave. Because the truth is, you can't stop someone from finding peace, especially when they've already fought harder battles than an HOA could ever throw their way. As the crickets began to hum and the cabin lights flickered on, I leaned back and smiled. "Welcome home," I whispered to myself. And this time, nobody called 911s. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.